We are going to look at one of my absolute favorite passages of Scripture today. The parable of the prodigal son is what it's usually called, and we're calling it the parable of the prodigal sons because I think that is a more appropriate title. I'm going to go ahead and read it. We'll get into it. We're in a series looking at the parables and miracles of Jesus, so we're kind of looking at what did he say and what are the miracles that he did. So this is Luke 15:11 through 32. If you got a smartphone, you can pull it out, or an iPad or anything, any other tablet. There's a link at the bottom of the bulletin you can type in if you want to read it on your device. It'll be right here. There's Bibles on the table. You can pick those up and read there as well. This is Luke 15:11 through 32. We'll read the whole parable. And he, Jesus, said, there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that's coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had, took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the field to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. Well, when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise, I will go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven, and before you I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven, and before you I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field. And as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he's received him back safe and sound. But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, look, these many years I've served you, and I've never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who's devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, son, you're always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad. For this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. This is the word of the Lord. Well, it's Father's Day, of course, as we've already said here today. And again, I hope that you are having a blessed time. If you are a father, or if you are with your father at all today, I hope you're having a blessed time being able to celebrate and honor your father, or be honored if you are a father. One of the amazing things about fatherhood, sociologists say, social scientists say, is that fathers have a unique and powerful role on their children and their families. Quality fathers who have a unique and powerful role in the shaping of their kids. So fathers that are tough and tender, who love their wives, who stay with their wives and their children, have an extremely powerful effect, sociologists tell us, on their children and their ability especially to succeed in the future, thus helping them to create healthy and stable lives and a healthy and stable society from there out. Conversely, social scientists say when fathers are distant, or worse, when they are absent or completely missing, it has an adverse effect on families and on their children and their ability to succeed in the future. As much as there's talk about gender equality today, and much of that is wonderful talk as we seek to empower women and kind of set right some inequalities in our society, we can do that to such an extent that we can forget the unique role that social science even says fathers and mothers play that are indispensable and should carry high and wonderful honor. And so because fatherhood is so delicate and so important, it can sometimes be a blessing to others and sometimes be a curse to others. But that reality, that importance of fatherhood and motherhood for that matter, but as we focus on fatherhood today, is a surprise to no one who reads the scriptures on a regular basis, those who are followers of Jesus, because the scriptures speak about father and motherhood. It's not an interchangeable role, and that they are vital for both families and for the life of the church. And indeed, there are scriptures you can look at which talk about every person in the church, every member of a church is to play, if you're a woman, it's to play a mothering role, especially to those who are younger in the faith and actually younger in age. And all of those who are older men should play a fathering role to all those others in the faith who are younger than them. So vital in the scriptures is the role of father that God has chosen to reveal his very nature to people as a father. And of course, if you're familiar with the Bible, if you've read much of it at all, but even if you've not, you're probably familiar with Jesus being called God's son. So we have a child-father relationship in the very core, at the heart of who God is. Even more amazing, perhaps, is that when you become a follower of Jesus and trust him, the Bible says you become sons and daughters of God the Father, himself becoming his own children. But for many, if you've had an absent father or a distant father, or God forbid something even worse, when you hear talk of God as Father, a lot of times people have a hard time receiving the good news of that because of the relationship they've had with their own father. My own father, for instance, was absent basically since after I was 8 years old, alcoholic as long as I remember. And so that can factor in when I see the Bible talk about God being a father. That can factor into my view, of course. Well, in this parable today, one of the things that it's doing, it's going to be a story about two sons, as we just saw. It's not a story about one prodigal son. It's actually a story about two prodigal sons. But even more than that, what it is doing is correcting any bad view we have of God as Father. And even more than that, even if you had the best father who ever lived, who was loving, who was kind, who disciplined you totally appropriately and never did anything wrong, this story is showing us how shocking and stunning God the Father truly is to all those who trust him. So again, it's one of my favorite parables. Let's go ahead and start taking a look. We'll start looking at the original prodigal son, I'll tell them. Son number one. So, the first son in the parable, look at his behavior. It starts right off. Jesus starts telling this parable. Look at his behavior as we get going. But even before that, so you're probably familiar with this parable because it's in pop culture a lot. Even if you're not a follower of Jesus at all, and if you're not, we're so glad that you're here with us. Even if you're not, you've probably heard the prodigal son returns at some point in some piece of TV or movies because it's such a well-known topic. But one thing you can miss before we get to the actual sons, look at how the parable begins. Verse 11 says, "And he said." The very first thing that's of consequence in this parable is just one little tiny word at the very beginning. And you may think, well, surely that can't mean anything, just a little "and" there. But this is a huge importance. That first word "and" means it's telling us the context in which Jesus is telling this parable. It links this parable to all the previous material that came in chapter 15 before this. It tells us why Jesus is telling this parable to this group of people. So let's look back at verse 15:1, chapter 15, verse 1, just a few verses before this. Here's what it says to start off this whole section. Jesus tells us this parable is in response to the religious and ethical teachers grumbling that he was eating and receiving with sinners. See that there? Now the tax collector and the sinners were drawing near them, and the Pharisees and scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable, and the parables we're going to look at today. There's a couple parables in there before this, and then it links back all the way to our verse 11, where it says, "And he said this." We already spent time, if you were with us over the last month, we've taken a lot of time to look at what a tax collector was. A quick overview of that. They were the most notorious corrupt sinners in their day. They stole from other people. They stole from their own people. If you'd like to, you can go back on our podcast on iTunes or on YouTube and listen to some of the sermons we've done with that. We did one on Matthew in particular and his calling. You can look at that if you want to hear more about that. And we've looked at who the Pharisees were. The Pharisees were the religious leaders, those who held themselves up as, we obey Torah, we obey the Bible, we obey the Scriptures. We tell everyone else, here's the standard God has. They were the most conservative, if you will, leaders of that day. So those are the two parties. We spent a lot of time looking at them. They were the rabbis who were most important at that time. And now here comes Jesus. He's a new rabbi. He is a new and radical rabbi in what he's saying and what he's doing. So how is he going to respond to these two groups of people? And what we see in verse 1 is that he's eating with these terrible sinners. He's eating with the worst people. And the religious people are getting upset about it. You see that? Where does he get the audacity to sit down with people like that, making him his equals in a sense? That is the reason Jesus tells this parable. He tells two others about the lost coin and the lost sheep before this, and this is the one that is the most extensive, most poetic, which is why we're looking at it today. So that's the whole reason he's telling this. So as we continue, he gets in to the two sons. Jesus starts off very quickly. How can you know this isn't the parable of the prodigal son, singular? Because the verse says a father had how many sons? Two of them. Right? This is about two sons going on here. The younger says to his father, "Father, give me a share of the property that's coming to me," and he divided his property among them. There is so much going on here in the first century context that we can easily miss it because it happens so much so quickly. Let me point out just a few things for you here. In the ancient world, for a first century Jewish father, your inheritance would not be evenly divided between all your children. One, you only gave your inheritance to any male heirs that you had. But this is the way it worked in the first century. In order to ensure the continuing of your name going forward, and so your family name didn't drop out, you would give a double portion to your eldest son of inheritance, and every other son would get an equal single portion. So if you had two sons, your elder son would get 2/3 of your inheritance, and your youngest son would get 1/3 of the inheritance. Again, that was a social way of continuing on the name of the family. So that's how it worked. Now, when is a normal time that a son would get an inheritance from a father? Any guesses? Well, in this society, just like ours in many ways, when you would get your inheritance is when your father passed away. We do that today, right? Usually today, there's exceptions, but you usually don't get an inheritance from your parents unless they pass away, and then it's passed on to you in their will. And now we see this younger son approaches his father and says, "Give me the share of the property now that is coming to me when we die." So if inheritances weren't given out until the father usually died, do you see what the younger son is saying to his father? Do you see how hurtful and audacious this request would be? He's essentially saying to his dad, "You're as good as dead to me. All I want is the money that you're going to give me. Give it to me, let me get away from this family, and go do my thing." If you're a parent, can you imagine hearing that from your own child at any point in your life? You're as good as dead to me. Imagine the pain and the shame and perhaps even the anger that would come. How dare you, child? Your child is shunning the relationship he has with you just to get your stuff just to get your money. Now, if you were a good first century dignified patriarch, Jewish father, you're dignified and respected in your community, your name and saving face means so much, what would you do to a request like that? He'd probably reject it outright. How dare you? You are not getting a penny from me. How dare you shame me like that? Maybe tell his son, you're being foolish. Don't do this. Don't do this to us as your family. Don't waste away your inheritance. Don't bring shame upon us. Please reconsider the destruction on the family that you are going to bring through this. You can imagine either a path of great anger at him or maybe great tears, both being justifiable as you hear this coming from your own son. But this father doesn't do either of these things, right? This father does, perhaps, even though we can assume there would have been many tears, this father does perhaps was the only thing that might be able to bring him restoration with his son at some point. He says, okay, and he divides the inheritance with his son. Now, we probably can think of people that are kind of like this in our own lives, right? Perhaps you're more like this. When you think of children, if you've had children over any period of time, we have 2 of them now, and I think we're seeing some of this kind of work out. But a lot of times, children can fall into 2 broad categories of people. They can fall into rule breakers, and they can fall into rule keepers. This son is a rule breaker, right? He is the free spirit, it would appear. He's the guy that wants to go off to LA, fulfill all his dreams, live, and, he'll be on TV someday, and his parents are like, oh my gosh, LA is crazy, you're going to die, like all those things, things that we know. There's a lot of situations like that, a lot of people here in Los Angeles where they are perhaps living something like that. Hopefully not as tragic as this story is, but a lot of times they can break into these categories. This would be the rule breaker category. So, his father gives him all that money. What does he do? What's the result of his rule breaking for the younger son? Well, he soon leaves, and it turns out he squanders everything that he has really quickly, it seems, at least in the story. He had all the freedom, all the money he wanted, and he wasted it away foolishly. He would have been, at that point, once the news got back that, boy, not only it's not like your son took all your money, took your inheritance, and then he went and built a big empire, and now, you're kind of proud of him because he's made something of himself. He would have been a huge disgrace, even more so to his family, because he wasted everything away, seemingly quickly. All his father's hard-earned money, and the very inheritance that his life was built upon. He went off to Vegas, and he blew it all on the roulette table in one weekend. Look how Jesus talks about what came after that. A famine comes. The man is so desperate and so poor, he hires himself out. And since he's off, he says that Jesus says in the story, he's off in a far country. Likely this would be somewhere where Gentiles were in charge. Non-Jews were the main citizens of the country. So, a Jew making yourself a bondservant to a Gentile is a huge disgrace for someone who has grown up in Israel in the first century. And the story tells them he was feeding pigs, and he was so hungry and so poor, he wanted to eat what the pigs were eating. Now, you know anything about first century Judaism, pigs are not looked upon fondly. Pigs are unclean animals. And so to want to eat what an unclean animal is eating is the lowest of the low place, rock bottom for a first century Jew. And then notice what Jesus says. At the end, he is all alone. No one gave him anything. He has ruined himself. Then, Jesus tells us he comes to his senses. He says, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? He realizes, look, my dad's got plenty of money still. There's no way he's accepting me back in the family. Maybe if I beg him, he'll make me one of his hired servants, and I'll have more than I have right now. So he thinks up this I'm sorry speech. He thinks up Maybe there's some way my dad can have mercy on me, and I'm going to trudge on back home. I'm going to take it like a man, and hopefully I can just become a hired servant. Now, think about the father. If you are a dignified man in the first century again, you're a respectable man, and your son has come to you, and he said, you're as good as dead to me. And now he's wasted away the inheritance you gave to him, even though you probably shouldn't have. Your hard-earned money, how would you respond when he comes back to you? Perhaps at best, you'd probably be extremely skeptical, right? Extremely slow to say, okay, that really hurt. You took all my money. You wasted it away. I'm going to be very careful with how much I give you again after this. You'd probably say that would probably be the best way. It would be completely imprudent, unwise, right, to go, okay, here's more money, son. You just wasted it all away. So surely you wouldn't do something foolish like letting him back into the family after all the damage he did. And also, the townspeople knowing the story, they all know by now what happened to Joe when he said that to his father and went off to Vegas and wasted away his money. Surely he could not do something foolish and let his son back into his family after the way he shamed him. That's not the way this father responds. This father, I hope you see now, represents what Tim Keller calls a prodigal God. You see, prodigal, if you're not familiar with what that term means, prodigal means reckless. Prodigal means wasteful. Prodigal means throwing all caution to the wind. That's, of course, what this son did with his inheritance, his money, when he went off to the far country and spent it all. But that's how this father is in love and forgiveness and mercy to his younger son. Look at what happens. The man arises, came to his father. Beautiful verse. But while he was still a long way off, his father felt compassion, saw him, felt compassion, ran, embraced him, and kissed him. There's so many details throughout this whole part. It's so beautiful. Let me highlight a couple of them. Jesus says that while the son was still a long way off, the father saw him and felt compassion. What does that mean? What was the father doing? He was sitting at the window. He was watching and waiting. You can't see him a far way off if you're not paying attention to what's going on far off in the horizon. This father is watching for him. This father is hoping he will return and show any ounce of repentance. He is not vengeful. He is not wrathful. He is not stooping in disgust, looking down at his son as he comes up. He's waiting. He's watching. He's longing for his son to come in. How do you think God looks at you? How do you think God looks at all of those who are far off away from him? Do you think he's vengeful? Do you think he's wrathful? Do you think he's waiting to pour out all his anger to pound people, sinners, into the ground? I hope you see a father here, waiting, watching, longing. That's not how God looks at you. What happens next is even more shocking, right? First century Jewish patriarchs, again, were dignified, respectable men of their community. Now, what do dignified and respectable men not do? They don't run. They wear long robes. They are the leaders of their family. They do not run. The robes that people probably wore, the best analogy we might have today in our modern society. I think of, you ever see commencement ceremonies at some of the big universities, really any university, but think of the most distinguished ones we have nearby, Stanford, Yale, Harvard, You got UCLA and USC, of course, nearby. And you ever see at the commencements, the trustees of the university, those who are the most honored doctors and leaders of the university, what are they wearing? All sorts of regalia, right? All sorts of, I'll put up a picture of one from Stanford. You can see all sorts of important people wearing their sashes and their robes and all sorts of things going on. You know, if you were to see, especially those like old guys on the stage behind there, when they go up to the stage, are they like, wee, running along, like seeing, they're kicking it up, they're running across the stage doing, the cha-cha or whatever? It's like, of course not. They're dignified. They're respectable. It would be weird to see them running. That's how it would have been for a first century patriarch. They do not run. Children run. But what is this father doing? He's running. As soon as he sees his son, he's running. His legs are up. He's hiking up his rope, and he's booking it to his son. He embraces him completely. He kisses him, sign of the deepest affection. It is a stunning scene. Imagine what the son is thinking. Perhaps he's going, whoa, this is crazy. Maybe he thinks, well, maybe I do have a chance. Maybe, okay, remember my I'm sorry speech. Here I go. I'm going to work it up. Here it comes. I'm going to say it to my father, and then hopefully, he'll let me be a servant in the field. So he says, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But notice, that speech is a lot shorter than the one before. The next word in the passage is but. The father essentially cuts off his I'm sorry speech. That's the evidence. That but there is the evidence we have that he waved off the whole thing. He said, silence. This father is ready to celebrate. He's ready to throw a party. He calls for the best robe. Whose robe would that have been? Best robe in the house? It's the father's robe. Bring the best robe and put it on him. Bring the ring. It's probably his own ring. Bring some of my shoes out. Put them on his feet. This is shocking. Re-acceptance back into the family. Completely, unabashedly becoming a son again. He's got the father's robe. He's got the father's ring. He's got the father's shoes. And then he says, get the best filet mignon ready. We're going to throw a party for the whole village. We're going to have a blast. That's kill the fattened calf. Beef was extremely, meat especially extremely expensive, and so only the wealthiest people had them. You only had them when there were special occasions and festivals. So to all of a sudden go, kill the fattened calf now, means this is one of the most celebratory scenes ever for this son coming home. If you don't already see or understand, this is the kind of father God is to his children. This is the kind of way that God accepts anyone that comes to him and says, I'm a mess. I need you. He waves off all our attempts at our own moral redemption, all of our own I'm sorry speeches and I will do this, I will be good, I will not do that. He waves all that off, says silence. Any attempts to say to God, I know I need your mercy, I know I need your forgiveness, so I'm going to try hard to be good after this. I will be worthy to receive your love and goodness. He waves all that off with his hand, knowing that we are actually like the younger son, wasted away all our moral, all our spiritual authority in foolish sin in lots of different ways. He waves it all off. He covers us in his best robe of love and righteousness. He brings us his own ring, puts it on our fingers. He throws the biggest party in heaven the moment you trust him and turn to him. He says, this is the greatest day ever. If If you have trusted Jesus already, if you've asked forgiveness, if you turn to him, you've sought him out, this is what he did for you. The day you did that. And he continues to celebrate you every single day. That embrace that we see of the Father on his Son, that's never ceased for you, his son and daughter. And if you haven't ever put your trust in Jesus, no matter what you've done before, he's watching and he's waiting, hoping that you will come and be a part of the celebration of the Father, hoping that you'll put your trust in Jesus and place his robe on you, his ring on you, his shoes on you, and bring you into his family, making you his son, making you his daughter. That's the God that we worship every Sunday. But that's not the end of the parable, is it? This is where so many people stop. So many children's Bibles. If you go find a children's Bible bookstore. There's not many around here, of course. But anyway, go find one. Find children's Bibles. You'll find this story because it's so beautiful. And they all stop after the first son. And I'm like, that's not the end of the parable. Read on. There's another son. There's an older son. Where is he while this is going on? Is he by his father's side, celebrating his brother has come home, his lost brother, and he's finally excited to see him back? Verse 25. Now his older son was in the field. The younger son, who was lost, is now by his father's side in his father's arms. The older son, though, is outside the father's house. He's out in the field. He doesn't know what's going on. He has to, servant, come over here. What the heck is going on? He has to ask what all this celebration is about. Don't miss the imagery here. The wayward prodigal son is now with the father rejoicing and celebrating. The older son, who's been there, is now outside the father's house looking in on the celebration, not understanding what's happening. Are you starting to see who the older son represents in this story? Are you starting to see who the younger son represents? Let's move on. Verse 28. The older son finds out this is your lost brother. He's come home. Your father's celebrating. He's brought him back into the family. He's throwing the biggest party imaginable. The fattened calf, filet mignon, is flowing aplenty to everyone. And he is angry. Who's he angry at? His brother, for sure, right? But we'll quickly see he is mad at his father, too. He refuses to go into the celebration once he's told. What has to happen? The father has to disgrace himself again. There is a party going on in his house, the biggest celebration ever, and someone comes in and tells the father, your older son is in the field. He won't come in. He's angry at you. He has to excuse himself from the party, disgrace himself again, and he has to go out and entreat his older son. Father again amazes everyone by kneeling down and disgracing himself for his sons. The younger son of the story returns to the father, but the older son has to have his father go out to him. And then look at this son's speech to him. Look how it starts. Does it start with, Father, I'm so confused. Can you help me understand? I don't know what's in. His speech starts with, look, there's no father, there's no respect, there's no honor. Look, these many years I served you. I've never disobeyed your command, and yet you didn't even give me a young goat. But when this son of yours came, he wasted all your money on prostitutes. And you're throwing a huge party for him? Doesn't address him as father. Just gives him a disrespectful look. He is angry. So think about this. What is he really angry about? Before you answer, think about it. What is he angry about? You may not have considered this. What financially, for the inheritance, does it mean to bring the son, the younger son, back into the family? That would mean the inheritance would again have to be divided. So now all that's left is the 2/3 that was going to the older brother. But now with the younger son coming back into the family, you got to split that 2/3 into 3/3 again. The older brother's inheritance is being lessened. And he is angry about that. So why is he angry? The older son is actually just like the younger son. What he really valued was not his father, but his father's stuff. What he really valued was the money, not the relationship with the father. Look, the younger son wanted the money, and he did it through rule breaking, right? The older son wanted the money, and he did it through rule keeping. And as soon as that money got threatened, the older son gets extremely angry, disrespects his father, does essentially the same thing in a different way that the younger son did earlier. The older son is just as sinful towards his father, but in a very different way. You see, so many of us think there's only one way to be lost with God. And usually what comes to mind is rule breaking, doing bad things, doing wrong, living in your sinfulness, wasting away your life, squandering away your morality by living like a young person in LA, sleeping out at night, partying, yada, yada, yada. But this parable tells us you can be lost. You can perhaps be even more lost because of your rule keeping. You can do all the moral things. You can go to church all the time. You can be lost, this parable tells us. Or, a more secular LA way, you can do all the charity work. You can be the most tolerant and accepting and loving person there is as a means to your own self-righteousness. And you can be totally lost before God. You can be completely religious and be lost. You can be completely moral and spiritual, and you can be lost, this parable tells us. You don't want the Father, you want the Father's stuff, is what this parable is saying. So how does the Father respond to his older son? Does the father shun his older son and go, how dare you? Yeah, you get out of the house and you go farther away. I'm done with you as well. How dare you disgrace me when I'm having the biggest party in town? Again, that's not his father. Son, you're always with me. Son, celebrate with me. Your brother's home. He was lost. Join us in the house again. Come be in the family again. Don't separate yourself. Rejoice with me, my son, because our family is united again. And then Jesus stops. We get the speech by the father, and then the parable ends. You go, wait, what? What happens? Does the older son say, oh, you're right, Dad, I'm such an idiot, forgive me, and then go in and start eating filet mignon? Does he go, forget you, you don't even understand, you wasted all our money, I'm out of here? What happens? Jesus doesn't tell us. There's a reason, though. Jesus ends it right there, right? He knows what he's doing. It's not like we lost the rest of the story and go, oops, maybe we'll find out in heaven. Jesus cuts it off on purpose. Remember, why did Jesus tell the parable? 15:1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were drawing near to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. So he told them this parable of the prodigal sons. I hope you see now, the tax collectors and the sinners, the bad people, are represented by the younger son here. God represents the Father in his reckless love and acceptance, who through Jesus is running to sinners embracing them when they show their need for God. We all are spiritual younger brothers, and he throws his robe of righteousness on us, his robe of forgiveness. He puts his ring on us. He puts his shoes on us. He says, come into the family. You are my son. You are my daughter because of Jesus and what he has accomplished. Now celebrate with me in joy never ending again and again and again. But this means that the Pharisees and the scribes, the religious people who were grumbling, who were self-righteous and thought they know what's right and everyone else is wrong, they're represented by the older son. So Jesus, in a sense, to these religious leaders of his own day who were grumbling against him, is saying, will you not come into my joy and celebrate the acceptance of sinners into God's family? Will you keep yourself pridefully outside of God's family through your self-righteousness? Well, Pharisees, come and trust me. Come and be received. Don't keep yourself outside. Come to me. Again, who is saved at the end of the parable? The younger son, right? The rule breaker is the one who's saved and rescued. Who's lost at the end of the story? The older brother, the religious one, right? But he has a chance to repent. He has a chance to change. He has a chance not to reject the love of the Father. So what does this have to do with us as we close? What can we learn from the older son here? Look, if you think you have it all together, if you think you're morally good, you're spiritually good, if you think before God you got it going on, and that it's all the other people who are bad, it's all the other people who need to change, if you think your church attendance, or your charity work, or your community service, or your politics, whatever they are, or your tolerant attitude, or anything else makes you good and acceptable before God, then you're actually in the place of the older brother. You are potentially outside of Jesus' love and forgiveness and family. If you think you're spiritually fine, you will actually be lost. Whether you're a conservative churchgoer or you're an LA progressive charity worker, Jesus stands before you, begging you to repent of your pride, begging you to repent of your self-righteousness, see that you are lost and not found, and to turn and come to him. And if you don't, you'll find that you're outside of this family forever. But for all those who do turn, for all those in here, like followers of Jesus, Christians that have done that already, for everyone in this room who admits, I can never stand up spiritually before a holy God. For all those who really know their own hearts and they go, I've squandered the spiritual wealth that God has given me. I have no riches of my own to bring to God. To all those who fall at his knees and admit their lostness, you'll find the Father's arms are already embracing you. The love of Jesus through his death and resurrection is already applied to you, forgiving you of your sin, making you righteous, making you a child of God. You'll find that you have God the Father better than any other earthly father who has ever lived and ever could live. And you'll spend your whole life and all of eternity celebrating with him, celebrating with everyone else, his amazing design. Let's pray. Father, this is a story that Jesus told. It is not a historical fact, but it is a vivid story to display a historical fact. That all of us in some way, whether through our rule keeping or through our rule breaking, are actually like the younger son. We are spiritually bankrupt before you. I thank you so much that you're not a father like I am so many times. You're not a father that goes, well, I'll wait till you get your act together and then we'll see how you do. But you're a father that's sitting at the window waiting and watching, longing for all men and women to come home to the God who made them and created them. What a shocking and stunning picture. Help us to know, if we know you, if we trust in you, the embrace, the robe, the celebration, the ring, the shoes, they're ours. I must be moved by that picture. And I pray anyone in here who hasn't put their trust in you and hasn't celebrated with you, they would see today could be that day. The Father throws his arms around them. Says, you were lost and now you're found. Let's celebrate because my son